Compositing is not a new concept for those who watch my videos. We are going to cover a few of the most common compositing elements in anime and how to do them. Letterbox speed lines. One that I don't recall seeing in the older shows like 90s and 80s, not that I'm the expert on this, is the letterbox action lines. These are basically like transparent action backgrounds that move over your character to emphasize action or presence, limited mostly of course to vertical or horizontal movement. I've seen some warping or distortion added to the video when this effect is added, but I prefer a more clean look. It allows you to push for a little bit more screen coverage. Feel free to use the distortion node to add some if you wish. So in order to make the letterbox speedline effect, we obviously need something to composite this over. Now for quick reference, I just made a little bit of a animation with Suzanne head going past. So this means because she is going towards the left, our lines are going to be going towards the right. This amplifies the feeling that she is moving in a direction because it makes it look like the camera is moving in the opposite direction. It just gives a greater sense of speed. So if you render this out with Freestyle, I'm using the experimental shader that I shared, I think it was earlier this week. You can check the link in the description below. But basically it just looks like this when you hit render. It's nothing fancy, it's just a blue monkey over an orange background with a point lamp that's right here in the center of this shot. So I'm just going to focus on this frame right here. And if you look at that in the compositor, this is what you see. It's nothing fancy, it's just there. Now what I already did, because I did this like twice, is I added a blend texture and a cloud texture. The blend texture is set to vertical because we need a mask. In this case, our lines will be at the top and at the bottom, which is letterbox. The other one is, I think it's called pillar box, but whatever. And of course the other one is a cloud texture, which is basically just our lines. It's the default cloud texture, it's as default as it comes. Now a big surprise, which some of you may not know yet, is 2.8 actually allows you now to edit the curves of the nodes you animate. So that is super awesome. At least it does in the compositor. I don't know if that works for materials just yet. But thankfully we are using compositing, so it doesn't matter. So quickly add your textures. Going to add the blend texture first because we want a mask. And I'm going to stick that into the viewer node so we can actually see what we're doing. There we go. Okay, so getting a color ramp. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky because we don't want the letterbox to be absolutely opaque. You don't want that because you kind of want to see what's going on underneath it. That's the whole point of it. So initially we're going to make it pure black, but we have to tone it down at the end to make sure that we don't have it too strong. So in this instance, we're just going to focus on the size of it. We don't want it to be too thick. We don't want it to be too thin either. It's usually just for emphasis because there's already movement and stuff going on the screen, so you don't want to overdo it. You do want to give it a little bit of a breathing space, but not too much either. So I think something like that should do the trick. Don't be afraid of doing it unevenly. Don't be afraid of playing with this. For example, let's say you want the focus to be only on the character's eyes, you know, the cleanest area of the screen has to be only the eyes. Then you feel free to make it, even if it's only as big as this composite node area, you know, it doesn't matter. Just don't do it just for the sake of doing it. Make a conscious choice when you do that. Let it make sense. Let it inform the viewer of something that you want to say. You know, this is a visual language. Okay, so with that settled, let's get our cloud texture. I think I already added it. No, I did not. Okay, so I'm going to add a cloud texture. It's already added over here, so I'm just going to select it. I already named it lines. Okay, I'm going to, let's take a default one instead. It's easier, it's much easier. It's just not make it worse. Okay, so first of all, let's scale this little sucker. I'm going to make this 0.5 and I'm going to make this like 8. Let's make it 7. Let's go for 7 right now. I think 7 is okay. Okay, we do want it to be a little bit more black than white, because usually the scene is already bright, you know, you don't want to overwhelm it. So let's switch to this B-spline or spleen or whatever way you pronounce that, and do something like this. I kind of like that. That's pretty. Now, if you want to get a preview, you can add a mix node in the meantime and multiply. Nah, I'm not going to multiply it. I'm just going to go for the default. Okay, so this is what we're seeing. Obviously, you can see why I say we have to not let it be opaque, because this looks ridiculous. If this is what you are going for, you know, sort of like a visor view type thing, absolutely go for it. Let the story or the scene inform whatever it is that you're going to be using to convey that message. You're going to hear me say that a lot. Okay, so I'm happy with that. We don't use alpha at this point. So this is where you get to just lighten it up a little bit. So let's see what we can do. I don't want it to be too dark. I don't want it to be too light either. I think what I want to do is just make it fade a little bit more. Something like that. It's like it's too dark initially, you know what I mean? So I just want to make it fade more. Let's see what value this is. And just copy and paste it. I think that looks cool. Let's see if we can just make it a little bit more concentrated. And I think that should do the job. Just take it back a little bit. I think that looks cool. I think that should complement our little monkey head nicely. Just want to turn down the white a little bit. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now, in my testing, I did do a multiply version of the black lines, and I did an offset version of the white lines. It did give me a different result, better, not necessarily just different. So you can also do it that way. It'll give you a different result. So anyway, now we need to offset this. Now, because it's 1, we're just going to be offsetting 1. Do remember that you might be adjusting this quite a lot, so keep that in mind. Okay, so offset, we're going to be offsetting it only on the X axis. So you can insert a keyframe, single keyframe, and move it along. And insert another keyframe. I think we have to go to the negative. Yes, we have to go to the negative to move it. Okay. So I'm going to move it almost an entire 1. Okay, now you can see when I select it, the keyframes appear. And they also appear in here. Now I've already locked my Suzanne animation because I've tried doing this before, so I don't have to lock it. If it's not locked, you can see that it's pretty much all selected like that. It might not appear exactly that way, but it can before you lock it, because it kind of deselects it when you save it and close it and all that kind of stuff. So just stick with that. Okay, so make it a vector. So just hover and V, vector, and channel extrapolation linear. I've noticed that if you don't make it vector and you try to scale it sometimes, it causes weird stuff to happen. For example, let me see if I can reproduce something like that. So we make it linear and we try to adjust it. You can see the kind of wobble it creates. Look at that. You see that? It's like it doesn't really know how to respond. It creates this weird curve motion. Ugh, it's awful. So make it a vector. Just please. See, look at that. See how smooth that is. That's awesome. Okay, so let's see how fast that moves. It's a little too slow for my taste. I think we're gonna have to take it a lot faster than that. Still a little slow. Let's make it 1 more. Okay, let's see that. I think that's better. Yeah, that's good. Okay. So I'm going to render this out and I'm going to see if it's fast enough. So just a quick recap. We have a mask texture. We have the lines texture, which is just a cloud and a blend texture over our normal rendering. And of course, this is just mixed, and that's it. It's a very simple compositing trick. You'll love it. So I'm just going to render this out and we're going to check it out. Okay, it is rendered and we are back with the sequence, and this is what it looks like. Now, some of you, this may be too fast. You can slow it down if you like. I personally think that this is pretty much spot on to what I would like it to be. But like I said, you know, your scene will determine what the speed will be for this, honestly. Soft gradient. Now this one is a bit more common than you might imagine. It is also a common film overlay. It sometimes adds a bit more mood to a scene or some brightness. Sometimes it does bother me when added because it can make a shot look a little bit faded or grey if too opaque. It can also be used with various blend types to make your shot actually pop a bit more. For example, let's say you have a villain and a victim, or a civilian or a hero in the same shot. You can use overlays like this to make your hero seem in a weaker state or at a loss of what to do in this moment. Other uses include bright shots to indicate glaring happening off screen, a more humid environment, just simply adding it for dramatic effect, or leveling out the brightness in a shot. Okay, so we're still using Suzanne as an example. So what I did is I just set up a very basic scene, 2 Suzanne monkeys, toon shader, and of course a single point lamp. Now the single point lamp is what we would call a natural gradient. In other words, one area of the shot is lit more than another area. You can also see that this orangey color appears to be, at least visually, a little bit less of a standout color than this light blue is. So that's a natural gradient. But if we apply the gradient to this particular scene, you will get something that looks like this. Just a basic example. So how we apply a gradient is extremely simple. You guys are absolutely going to love it. Is you go into your compositor. Now you see this is the basic setup, but I'm going to explain it to you. What I did is I added a blend texture, just plain blend texture set on horizontal. Nothing fancy about it. And I added 2 nodes. One is rotate and the other one is scale. Now I'm going to show you why I'm adding a scale one as well. So I'm just going to connect them up directly in sequence. Remember, the rotate one has to go first, and I'm going to show you why now. Okay, so when you rotate something in the compositor, especially procedural textures, this is what happens. Look at those edges. That is not cool. And that's why we have the scale. I noticed that at roughly 2.25, you know, relative scale, you don't get these edges. So that's a very good default to go for. See? Gone. So in order to get those contrasting colors back, I recommend using this B-spleen option. It just gives a little bit more control. Especially since we lose some of the image information when we have to scale it. There we go, make this one black, and add another one, make this one white. There we go. That's cool. So that is our gradient. Now our shot is obviously going diagonal, and in this instance we want to use the example of making one character seem to be in the dark or at a loss of what to do. So we're going to rotate it to continue with that narrative. Something like that should do the trick. If you need to, you can use a mix node to get a bit of a mix view to see whether it's fitting or not. I think this will do the job. So I'm going to add a mix node, and I'm going to multiply this one. The reason I'm multiplying this one is because we want our character in the dark, but we don't want to darken this character just yet. We want actually to make that character a little bit brighter, just to add a little emphasis. So I'm just going to push back the darkness a little bit over there and open up the brightness there. something like that. That looks really cool. Now we're using obviously the exact same texture, so just moving down to get another one, and I'm going to add an overlay. Now the reason I'm adding an overlay is because I want to get a little bit more contrast to the brighter monkey. So that goes in there, and I'm adding that one. So you see immediately it's brighter, but we can't use a pitch black color. We have to use a medium gray, which is 0.5, so that the black area is basically invisible. Something like that, but we do want it to be a little bit less intense. Something like that should do the job. Okay, and finally we want a little bit of a hint of some off-screen glaring blaring. That's funny. So use add and get another one and put it in there, and obviously adjust a lot so that it's nice and soft but not overwhelming the shot. I hate it when these glares overwhelm something. It's just really annoying. I think we can go for something like that and just reduce it a little bit over there. And there you go. This creates a sense that this character is not the focus, number one. It creates a doubt over the character, and it helps us to focus on what the creators want us to focus on. So for example, if this character is talking and the light is on the character, the other characters are put in the dark, obviously you're not going to struggle to know, oh, that's what I'm supposed to look like, look like. So yeah, that's good. So you can use this on motion shots as well. Do be aware that you might need to adjust your compositing as well to go along with it. What you can also do is you can render a very large, like panoramic shot and just pan the camera over it. You can do something like that as well. White background with soft glow. A bit more of a classic. We sometimes get slow motion shots for obvious dramatic effect. What I love about this one is that it blanks out the background and isolates the character with the highest intensity possible, white. Do note that it is not always that the character is alone on this white plane. You may find some shadows and some other elements to the special shot as it relates to the action being taken. For example, if someone has to keep someone from driving off a ramp, but they try to make the jump anyway, then the hill or ramp, whatever form it could take, would also be included, though the sky and everything else will be white. This is also used for dramatic monologues. Okay, so we're using this one again. Basically what we need from Eevee, because Eevee doesn't have material index just yet, is to create a transparent background. Now you create a transparent background by going into your render settings, going into film, and setting alpha to transparent. This creates the sense of material index by creating a transparent background. So if you render this out, you'll see something like this. So I'm just going to remove this old compositing setup, and I'm going to use alpha. And there we have a white background. Now to blur this over, it's very simple. Take a blur node, get your alpha, set it to fast Gaussian. I use fast Gaussian because it's one of the best methods in terms of clarity. Let's use 3. I've noticed that it's easy to overwhelm the scene with this. So you can set it to add it, and invert. That's a big one, invert. And there you go. Now one thing that's usually added as well, that's not always obvious, is a slight blurring of your shot. Now as you guys know, I did put together a lot of compositing nodes. There is one that's called Quick Blur that is very appropriate for this. So what you guys can do is you can check the link in the description for the compositing nodes, and you can just append those as you need them, or you can append them to your default project. And there we go, that's a quick blur. I'm just going to move this point because I want to put the blur in there. This is obviously too intense, so we're going to just reduce that. I think 0.1 is good. Yeah, something like that. That'll look cool. So if you want to just tone it back a little bit but keep that softness, you can just add a filter with sharpen and set it to a low value like 0.1 or something like that. It just emphasizes your lines a little bit but still keeps that nice soft feeling. And it's as simple as that. So I'm just going to render this out, and then I'm going to show you guys how to make this slow motion. Okay, so assuming she is moving at the exact speed that we want, you can of course slow it down. We are going to make this slow motion, or appear to be slow motion. So what you need to do is you need to obviously set a strobe. Now strobe means to flicker. In this case we are reducing the frequency, not increasing it. So I noticed that in a test I did, the Mordecai flip, I used 18. So I'm going to use 18 again because we only have like 66 frames, which means, that's about it. That's about what we got. And I think that'll be fine. So doing this, of course, we want to duplicate it. And you want to use alpha over. Thankfully, that seems to be the default. And we need to make it 0.2 in terms of its opacity. Now we're going to use the lazy man's motion blur, as it has been affectionately called, to create that sense of fading from one frame to the next. Let's just scroll through it. That is so cool. I'm going to, for the sake of interest, add a white frame at the end, just so that it doesn't just stop, Okay, that's cool. And it can stop over there. That'll be our last frame, and that is 183. Now I'm going to render this out, and then we'll be checking this out. Oh, that's so cool. And there you have it. Black screen with images. The counter to this, of course, is the black background with maybe a circle floor for the character, but this is usually just to focus on the character, not the intensity of what they are doing in that specific moment. For example, a character could be about to tell us their backstory, so the background goes black and we get a slideshow type view of their past, which again can end with the white background to show their intensity or resolve to move on and be victorious or mediocre. Just be creative. Okay, now because this one is a little bit more complex, actually a lot more complex, I'm just going to take you through my files. So what happens is you need to build memories like you just saw in the example. So what I did was I went to look for test renders involving the Suzanne monkey head, and I created this sort of zoom and turn kind of thing in the VSE. So you can see it's nothing fancy. All you do is you just take a picture and you add a transform strip to it and you animate these keyframes. It's very, very simple. I did keep it on alpha over just to keep my options open. I didn't know exactly how I was supposed to approach this, but the Lord always leads. So anyway, I just kind of created like this slideshow effect like I spoke about just now. And of course I faded to black with a sudden fade to white as well, just to add that little punch of resolve. So of course you need to plan your slideshow ahead of time. You have to take into account how long the speech is going to be, how long the backstory is going to be, how much is really relevant to the backstory, how much is really relevant to the story, how much can you actually include without overwhelming your viewer. Now, I used just 5 pictures and I already feel like 5 is way too much. So unfortunately I can't remember any specific backstories right now, but I think if you keep it simple, your audience will love it. So of course, after you've made this, you need to take it into the compositor. So here we are in my compositing setup. As you can see, it's a little bit complicated, but it's not as bad as it looks. This one is to fade to white at the end. Now this fade to white at the end is not there so that the video will fade to white. The video stops at its frame, and when those frames run out, it's blank. Now blank typically renders as black, so I added a mix node in here that was timed perfectly to the end of the video, so that when the video ends it pops to a white instead of continuing on. So anyway, moving on, we get our alpha influence. So let's look at our alpha stuff. So of course I want my little Suzanne monkey to vanish. Now, I didn't do this on the material, because if you do this on the material side, you get like this weird plastic, transparent plastic look. So your character shows off as a shell. I didn't want that. I wanted my character to have a nice fade out. So if you look at the fade out I do get, you can see that she fades out like that. Look at that. Gone. That's the best way to do it. If you try to make your character disappear in a different way, you have to mess with backface culling and, you know, the light path node and all that kind of stuff. If you want to do that, have at it. I just think this is simpler. And of course that determines the mask. Let me just go back a little bit like that. You can see there it goes. This is the mask, by the way, the alpha mask. And of course I did add a little bit of a quick blur in there just to give that memory kind of feel to it. And what else? I had to of course invert to create that white outline glow that we covered earlier, which is just what all this stuff is at the end. And that's pretty much it. It's not as complicated as it looks. It just takes a while to set it up. Like with any other effect we can do in compositing, be selective about what you use and where. The great thing about anime as a medium instead of a genre means that these can be used to comedic effect as well. For example, you are a villain there is no space for in this backyard. Your time has come to leave this sandbox in peace or defend your position if you dare.
Oh, you surrender? I knew you would.
I loved making that. Best practice. Use an effect only when it makes sense to do so. Quick run through again. Letterbox speed lines are for speed and or character emphasis. A soft gradient can be used for emotional or environmental boost. A white background with a soft glow is to set your focus on one character or moment. And that's it. Have a great one, and God bless you.